which means it's time for chilling. And bring this up. Mark will join at some point whenever he's ready. So, welcome. And this is mostly going to be an intro so that I know where to actually cut the edit at so that I can upload this to YouTube. But welcome to the first lore video for Cincope. Today we are going to start with basically wherever history should start, at the beginning. We're not going all the way back to freaking progenitor species level, but we are going to be starting, like, really early. It's basically going to be like the Legends era. And as appropriate for that, we're... not that. I needed this one. We're gonna be having... Actually, maybe doing the completion list for it wouldn't be too bad of an idea. No, I like this. I put all the effort into doing this, so we're gonna do this. Anyway, as I was saying... Welcome to the first episode of Cincope Lore. Possibly going to be doing more after this, but we'll be starting in the Legends era. Also known as the I added this era because I used this for a D&D world for a bit. But we'll start off with effectively the gods, I guess, because they created the whole thing. And they're the reason why several of these places, such as Mortis Marshes and Mortis Heel, exist, the God Spike. And the most important one for the events of the Legends era was Morta, who is, as the name probably gives away, the goddess of death. She's more of a Greek goddess of death rather than a modern era goddess of death. She isn't trying to freaking murder everyone and just get all of her freaking job. She's like, yeah, someone's gotta do it. And she absolutely hates desecration of the dead and necromancy and all that jazz as a result of it. Her basic opposition is Gran, who is the goddess of life, and is basically an old lady that just kinda wants to deal with her plants, which is kinda where her name came from. There are the twin gods, Asus and Atus, the earth and water gods. Atus kinda got stiffed. He doesn't have anything special aside from some elementals. Asus has a dragon turtle avatar. At least that's what everyone believes the largest dragon turtle is. It's an avatar of him, which is floating around somewhere in the main ocean here. And then there's Eris. He's just dad god. He basically created everything, and he's basically the one that says, hey, stop that, when everyone gets angry and starts to try and do stuff, which they did. Mortis' heel is not like an exaggeration. That's literally where her heel landed when she tried to kind of just destroy everything. The god spike was raised by Atis to go up and do the rest of her foot to stop her from destroying all this. Asus created this large lake to protect the rest of this area from the spreading, basically effective death, because she's sort of like the Grim Reaper. Wherever she winds up planting her foot, effectively just starts to wither. She has got the touch of death, as it were. And then Gran smeared her hand across here, and it became a sort of verdant landscape, I believe is the proper terminology for it. And so the Godlands were created. Also, it's very fitting that I, Nasu, am the one listing all this stuff off, because Nasu is the one who was kind of telling the story as far as, like, what my explanation was for why anyone cared about stuff that was going on when I was running the D&D campaign that took place in Legends era Cincope. Things were kind of normal. The peoples of various lands were enjoying their time of not being completely destroyed by stuff. They spread into northern islands as well. Godlands are up here. You can see the Metal Isles here. These are hand-drawn maps by people of the era, quote-unquote. So, where they aren't terribly accurate to the actual shapes of everything, they are... which is also why there's so many spelling issues. These were literally just random peasants that decided to go on adventure and decided to write out. This in particular is actually from a non-Cincope native, which is why it has certain notes. This note, and these little X's, and this yen sign. There's several markings on these maps that are not from the original, because there is a non-Cincope native named Maurice that actually owned this map in particular. But that comes a little later in the story. But effectively, everyone was migrating between the different areas, between the Godlands and down here. Nifon was an isolated nation-ish. It's a group of nations. Completely unrelated to any of the gods or anything that happened here, just inanely magical beings. It's effectively nations of yokai. They spent most of this time frame alternating between fighting with the Minotaurs and mining resources of the Metal Isles and fighting with each other. In this time period, this is an entire cliff. It's a surrounded cliff area. There is no beach here as of this point in time. However, things were not meant to stay peaceful forever, because things need intrigue, interest, all that good jazz. Actually, this isn't where the portals come in yet. There were several kingdoms in the deserts of Mortis Heel that wound up fighting, and in the end only 2 wound up actually progressing to a certain degree. Only 2 survived the Grand Wars, and one of them was around here up near the M, and one was way down here near the passage out of Mortis Heel. These were the only 2 surviving. What's the best way to put them? I guess sort of kingdoms would be the best way to put it. In time, they both sort of just sunk below the sands, and were never heard from again. We'll get into why when we get to the actual Legends era. There was no real explanation for what happened to them aside from that, as far as anyone knew, because by the point that they had disappeared, everyone aside from those 2 kingdoms had left because they were tired of just being either subjugated or murked, just outright obliterated. Most just assume that it was events to do with the portal openings that led to them sinking below the sands. But aside from that, there wasn't a whole lot of major conflict going on during the pre-portal era. Aside from the gods are really angry at each other at this point in time. But in time, the portals all opened across the continent, and things were changed pretty much forever. Strange creatures came out from them in various areas. As far as important notes in that, large life forms started going across the deserts. I guess that the best way to put them is they're sort of like stone turtles. They kind of sift through the sands through their feet and pick out little microorganisms. And they are preyed upon by giant sandworms. People from different lands came along, and as some in time found out, the portals weren't exactly known for their uniformity. They could spit out something that was very helpful, or something that was very mundane, like, say, someone's TV remote or something. I guess it would be a mundane thing. Doesn't really hurt anything, doesn't really help anything. Could be a person that's just kind of lost. It's unfortunate for them, but as long as they aren't, like, super hostile, they aren't gonna just immediately get killed. But they might have changed. They may have split into multiple people, they may have swapped genders, they may have become something else if they weren't inanely connected to anything in particular. There are things related to forces of nature that could get through unchanged, but if they were tied to a standard law, they could potentially change based off of law changes to physics and the like in Cincope itself. Oddly enough, the waters were actually one of the areas that wound up getting hit the hardest as far as having the most stuff happening. Which made traveling across this area and anywhere south to the Southern Isles kind of impossible for a long time, aside from by, like, adventurers that were extremely skilled or just plain insane enough to try. The only one of note that, and it's more of note because of what events transpired following his voyages, rather than the fact that, oh yeah, he's another one of the idiots that decided that he was going to try and brave this area. A man named Horm, captain of what would later be known as the Cliff Cutter, because he took credit for being what caused the entire eastern shelf of the Eastern Lands to shatter and turn into the beachhead that it was at this point, and it is today. And no one really was around to contradict him, and everyone else that was on the ship was like, oh, well, we'll all be seen as heroes and whatnot, and as brave adventurers for finding this new land that the higher-ups can deal with. We'll be fine. We'll just go along with it, whether it's a lie or not. No one truly knows if it's a lie or not. Aside from him and his crew. But after the mostly dissipation of the portals, there's still scattered portal events going on here and there post this. But it was effectively a mad scramble to try and settle the Eastern Lands. Because, oh, there's cool new things. What could possibly be in that mysterious bowl that we have all known exists for all this time and have never actually been able to get to? Because no one could climb the cliffs because the cliff gliders shoot arrows down at us until either we're all dead or we all give up. The cliff gliders being a race of snake people that basically built their homes in the cliffs surrounding the Eastern Lands. One of the species did anyway. There are multiple species of them. Subspecies, I guess, would be the more operative term. Because species just biologically is ones that can cross with each other and not become either sterile or have massive issues going on. But this beachhead meant that there was now a area that people could attempt to settle it and not have the issues of getting shot at as they're trying to scale a multi-hundred meter tall cliffside. That's a minor exaggeration. It is a very tall cliff, though. It did lead to some minor fights between those of the Godlands and Nifon because they both wanted to try and get land. But as people found out, there was another reason that this wasn't going to be easy. And it was also partly because part of the reason why the Cliff Gliders liked their walls so much. The entire continent wants you dead. Let's see if I... There were creatures there that were extremely hostile to everything. Due to it being an isolated area, everything had been very much engineered to kill each other, and had either become super efficient at killing, or had become super efficient at not getting killed. It's sort of like the Island of Vipers, where due to the only thing being able to get there was birds, all the vipers are so poisonous that they will actually kill you in like half an hour, and you're 3 hours away from the nearest land. Kind of that, but not with only venom, and everything has this kind of extreme temperament. But there were multiple boons as well as a result of the portals. Technology had started coming through the portals, and with anything, if there's anything to be learned from it, intelligent races will try to. And the birth of the Tinkerers happened in various large cities, mostly the southernmost city, the westernmost city on the southern continent, and obviously the capital, had formed Tinkerer guilds to learn about reverse engineer and try and manipulate various technology that came through these portals. They didn't exactly wind up becoming overnight geniuses with lasers and C4 and radio technology, but they did learn a decent amount and rapidly entered the industrial and gunpowder era. And even though they didn't exactly have a one-to-one relation with a lot of the stuff, they were able to make up certain things, especially due to changes happening in the land as a result of the portals. The portal metals were very good at making structurally sound, yet relatively lightweight materials. They were very rare, so they were very expensive to work with, so you weren't exactly going to be immediately making yourself a dagger on a peasant's salary that could breach its way through 3-inch thick plate while still being as light as a feather. But it was effective. Though a lot of towns realized that the most important thing about the portal metal, until there was enough portal activity to create plenty of it, was as warning systems. They would effectively have bell towers that were hunks of this uncarved metal. That way they could glow like a lighthouse when there was activity that was going to happen, because the metal would react and glow when the energy that created the portals concentrated enough to where they would form said portals. And especially in areas like the marshes, which for some unknown reason to the populace had a very high rate of these portals opening. These became like a life and death kind of device. I say device. A warning system, though. There were multiple towers with these portals, just in case whatever came through them happened to destroy one of the towers, so that there were backups, so that people knew what would happen when there was one, so they could prepare. Which became useful because On one fateful day, shortly before the main events of the campaign I ran in this era, there was a black dragon that came through the portal and melted most of the walls and took out 2 of the towers as a result, before flying far up into the north of the marshes. Yeah, I need a drink. Also, I love this song. Throughout this time, there were many expeditions into the Eastern Lands that didn't get terribly far. Where is my map for this? I had a map that I made for the Eastern Lands. It's modern era Eastern Lands, but it's still important. It's been eaten by my files somewhere. Either way. But effectively, once you got past the beach itself and into the forest proper, your distance was limited. You could count the number of miles you could go in land past the beach in single digits. There were a few exceptions, but for the most part, the further you went in, the less likely you were to be able to actually make a fort that could protect you from anything that was going on in there in time. The only reason that the farthest one actually succeeded is because they weren't creating for themselves. It was a multitude of expeditions that all made minor progress each time on creating the fort. And these were large ones because they knew that there weren't going to be many survivors for each grouping of it if they didn't send like 100 plus people in. The Nephanese had a minor advantage in that regard because they are obviously closer. They don't have to waste most of their original resources coming from all the way over here, going and weaving their way through these islands and getting in. They just go, alright, well, we get a bunch of Onis to protect us here, and then we'll get a bunch of various other... When they weren't fighting each other, they could effectively get in. And as people found out in my recent one-shot, the Nephanese actually did make the farthest in fortress literally possible, I guess is the way to put it, because it was pretty much dead center. Before the opening of the well, anyway. It wasn't very long before the opening of the well, but they did manage to make their way over there. Though, while everyone was scrambling for over here, Godland still did have a bit of a different prize that they kinda needed to wrangle back in. Many colonies down in the Southern Isles had been lost, and were unable to actually keep contact because not being able to transport by hand before there was any like radio or anything. It's kind of hard for you to get a boat through in order to get this if all of the water is turning into maelstroms that lead you into other dimensions, or trying to send a carrier pigeon that might be swallowed by a freak portal. Even the closest island wasn't exactly able to keep best contact. It's the only one that had any form of contact at that point, but it wasn't exactly reliable. So, there were several expeditions sent down after everything calmed down. Also, my encoding is freaking going to crap again today. Ugh. Stretch my spine. Considering the fact that there is one in particular that is known by people and is canonized, I guess we'll start there. There were about 7 fleets that were sent from... I say fleets. They were single ships. They were airships. 7 airships from a tower in... a freaking... sent from this city here. They were sent south. And one of them decided that its trail was going to be all the way down south, all the way to the farthest one first. And they found pretty much nothing. There was a single exploded shack and a lot of rats, as well as a what can only really be described as a smuggler's hole. Nothing else, really. Pretty much an abandoned island. Following island, second verse almost exactly the same. They did find a single person from one of the colonies. He'd gone pretty much completely mad. And I guess I can freaking spoil. Because it's not happening anymore. But he wasn't actually from the colonies. He was a liar. He was a doppelganger who had, after a unfortunate job, been sucked into a portal and wound up finding himself down here. He disguised himself as an old man named Gnome. Way far off, because he was actually part of a group of them from a lesser-known city over here. The city didn't really prosper until the post-Well era, because I mean, no one cared about this side because this is the only way to get over here. Everyone's gonna come over here for the sense of adventure and everything. It was mostly just rudimentary trading between these two groups. It's a small fishing town. Not a village, it's a little bigger than a village. Anyway, continuing on with the story down here. He was the only one there. There was evidence of whatever came from said shack had come along here massive treads, tracks, footprints. And it had, once again, gone boom. And as they approached this, a volcano, effectively. It was a mountain that was just coming out of the sea. They found out that it was effectively a sort of shell of sorts. To put it bluntly, openly, it was freaking somehow a mech made of wood and random other stuff. But this was a metal-rich island and had many other things. They found a particular other traveler from another dimension. 2, actually. One with a magical camera, and one with an unusually creative brain that was able to form things and effectively become, without knowing it, a tinkerer from another land. They accepted both of them onto the ship and continued on, landing within this crater on this dog-shaped island. Well, they docked at a watchtower in said crater. Found a group of furbolgs who had found themselves in a bit of trouble, arguing with a group of what can only be described as highly religious, obsidian-worshipping people, which wanted the crater not for the strategic value, not for the fact that they believed that they deserved the entire island. It was because the crater, being a long-dead volcano, had a lot of obsidian in it. This entire leg had been turned into a obsidian city, split into different districts, labeled by the various colors. They all followed a book that had come from another dimension that effectively had told them how to form their council, and, or as they interpreted it, had told them how to form their council, told them that this black stone was important, had told them the importance of various colors in relations to things, and had told them that certain blue-skinned individuals were working with less savory individuals. The difference being that they didn't interpret properly that the head shape of these things was because these were slime beings that were being described and written and drawn in this book, not humanoids. So they were already on not great terms. Several others had been brought in via portals, including an entire freaking company of legionnaires, which wound up camping out on this hump here as discussions and arguments wound up happening. There was, in the end, finally, a treaty that was discussed, in which, due to some unfortunate circumstances, the Obsidian worshippers got the upper hand and effectively backed him into a corner, and where the Furbolgs would, in the end, wind up being able to survive and not have to be at war anymore, they would definitely have an issue of, all your stuff belongs to us now. You don't care about your, plant, your freaking food or anything. We just want the obsidian, but you don't get any of it anymore. If you desecrate any more of it, we will just demolish you. And then they walked off. No one quite knows what happened to this expedition after that. There was an incident with a ship that had crashed in the middle of said peace talks, and no one quite knows what they decided to do after that. In the end, freaking... not many of the expeditions made it back. There were connections made, so it's assumed that most of the expeditions were successful to a certain degree, but as far as if they actually had successfully completed their mission altogether, it's unknown. One of the airships was confirmed to have been shot down in the Kangaroo Island. There were tales of one of the Godlands marked airships still being on the Spiral Star Island, having decided to stay there due to enjoying the company of the individuals on there. Various species of, some call them mutants, some call them monsters. It's up to a matter of perspective. The Stake Island was not actually brought back into the fold via the airships. It was actually brought back because one of the captains of one of the death ships decided to visit back home and had discussed with her father about rejoining the Godlands kingdom, which he agreed. In the end, whatever wound up happening to most of the expeditions, the important part is that most, if not all of them, had, by the time of the opening of the well, been brought back into the fold. And thanks to the advancement of technology, didn't have to worry about getting split up because they couldn't physically bring letters back and forth once the portals reopened. Mortis Heel, unfortunately, had an unfortunate realization. Doubly unfortunate once you realize that it's literally named after the person that hates the undead. There was a kingdom of undead. One of the two kingdoms had come and awoken, and where the king of that kingdom had been defeated, unfortunately, his main goal was to stop the other kingdom, and after his thralls, I guess is the best way, decided, hey, we're not doing this anymore, freed themselves, and then got out of there. After killing him, there was no one to stop this king from just kinda taking over. In the post-Well era, the only area that still exists as an actual town is this town up here in the middle of the lake. It had strong walls, and it wasn't constantly having to worry about the sandworms because it was so far north that most of them weren't really wanting to deal that much with the more water-oriented types of silt and sand. Any most civilized towns and villages and whatnot throughout the desert had in time been laid to waste or converted, turned undead themselves. And even after they had been completely destroyed, because Morta doesn't exactly appreciate undead, wound up just sending her own... You don't have an option. I'm not asking type of requested heroes down there to put a stop to it. No one trusted to stay in areas anymore, and if they did, even if they did, they found out that trying to start from scratch in an area that has massive worms that are just going to wind up just killing most anyone that tries to settle in these areas, not exactly efficient. Not effective at all. So, these are mostly nomadic lands as of now. There aren't very many elves in Cincope in the Legends era, which is odd because considering it, you know, you'd expect a D&D conforming era to have them, but no, there are pretty much none. Because I'm the writer and I find elves not great. There is a single, conventional elf, because it was going to be for world building and explaining several things. A ancient freaking... I say ancient. He's just aged because he's been broken off from his god, which meant that he actually is aging at a standard rate. But he's a crazy dude in the God Spike. Gone crazy because he can no longer commune with his god or see any of his memories in the grand scheme of things. The tree elves are, you know, kinda elves, but they are just... They sell tree. Their entire economy is based around the fact that they are extremely good at working with plant life and are very good at effectively making massive bulks of what is effectively cannabis and tobacco. And stuff that would relate from that kind of stuff. They don't need to make anything else because people absolutely love the product, so they kind of just, you know, use that as their main export. And they can import most anything else. They don't have a lot of stuff that they really want, so... They're on the inlands of everything, pretty much, so no one else can work with plants as well as they can. They are effectively not having to worry about anything, aside from the occasional portal incident. Before we move to the God Spike, we'll discuss things like the Northern Lands and the Frozen Shelves. The Frozen Shelves are exactly what it sounds. It's just a massive chunk of ice in the northern caps. Northern and southern cap. There are things there, but odds are that you're not going to wind up seeing them. if you try and go up there. And if you do, you're gonna wish that you hadn't. They have become very sturdy and very effective at what they do. They aren't terribly fast, but they are very cunning, is the best way to put it. It's effectively like if you had a Venus flytrap, but it was built like a tank bear trap. If something goes into it, regardless of its size, it's not coming out. And there are some, like, party people that have gone up there and decided that they're going to try and live up there. Mostly larger beings, like giants and the like. But most, how do I put this? Races that aren't trying to prove something, mostly just only go up as far as the northern lands, which is effectively still a tundra, but it's livable. And, you know, you can actually be within walking distance of, or, well, expedition distance of anything else. There are some tinkers that have decided to go up there due to the amount of heat that is produced by various of their experiments. So they don't just either die from the amount of heat that's being given off, or they can keep cool things that have to run for long amounts of time. Moving on to the main feature of the Godlands, and kind of part of what it is used for, its name is about, the God Spike. A towering, as it implies, towering city built into a mountain that reaches above the clouds. Is sort of the religious center of everything in the Legends era. It's the capital, obviously, because in this era it's all the power. Everyone still believes in the gods. Everyone knows that they exist. They're gonna listen to whoever's been ordained to speak for them. They have a very interesting culture due to how many different groups there are in it. And also due to one... I mentioned how there were no conventional elves. There are dark elves. And you may be like, oh, okay, so they're like how it is and everything else. It's like, no, they don't do raids. Obviously, if they were doing raids in the biggest city with the biggest army, they'd just be at war. There's a very interesting way that they do things. Depending on your crime, you might just be given to them. If you have a severe enough crime, you are sent down, and you are set to mine various things, or expand the research tunnels, I guess is the best way to put it. because you're expendable at that point, and I mean, it's a punishment. You're not meant to enjoy your punishment. It did lead to a riot because, at a certain point, because obviously you choose only the worst of the worst, and those that are either strong enough or dumb enough to have done something severe enough to get sent down there, and you're gonna wind up with unhappy people, and you're gonna wind up with people that can actually do something in regards to it, regardless of what guards they have on them. Obviously, in the end, said riot was quelled, but it did leave a lasting scar due to one of their chief things that they had been mining was living crystals. And since they didn't know the importance of it, and some of them were, as they are labeled, crystal poachers at the time. They, luckily for everyone else, didn't actually wind up using them for anything that would have been more difficult to deal with. But the crystals do produce a lot of energy, so they had been created into various bombs, which within mere days had made it to where the access from the Godspike proper into literally the entirety of anything down below was restricted to a single bridge. The entire town was cut off aside from a single bridge. I guess that is a good segue into the crystals themselves. Sentient crystals who are quite magically attuned. They're actually not a result of the portals. They did increase in strength after the portals, and there did become various things that they gained afterward. But they aren't born of the portals. They are native to Cincope. They have various things they are used for. Some of them are just used for simple lighting, normally in older buildings due to the fact that they are unknown. They weren't known as sentient back then. The main thing that they were used for at this point, though, was rudimentary teleportation. What would effectively happen was you would have taken a large crystal and had whoever was meant to deal with it either you build the building around it so it doesn't have to like whoever it's dealing with as much because it's still in its home, or if you moved it, the person had to spend actual months to potentially years calming the crystal and communing with the crystal and attuning to the crystal so that it would agree with it. And even then, you still needed another crystal, either from the same family, quote-unquote, or that was close enough, another quote-unquote, with the crystal in order to use it, in order for it to agree to this. And depending on the species of living crystal, you also needed, if it was like a cross-species teleportation, you needed a piece of the other crystal for it to attune to in order to actually properly use the teleportation. It's unknown if the crystal poachers knew of this nature of it, or if they were just doing it because they realized, well, all the religious figureheads liked the crystals, and a lot of the nobles like the crystals for some reason, so if we take them all, then we can sell them to them for like a higher price, because there won't be any more. Crystals don't like that, and they found out the hard way that they were called living crystals because they were living. They weren't as easy to react to standard strikes and whatnot. If they were smaller, they especially were easily poached, but if you tried to carve into a large crystal and it didn't like it, you were basically sentenced to death. It would absorb energy until it had enough energy to strike back in, depending on the species, a sort of backlash that would it almost certainly lead to death for people that weren't, how do I put this, of stronger constitutions or blessed in some way. But in time, people stopped poaching said crystals because it was just a risky job, and it turned out that, much like the diamond industry, there were more crystals than was actually needed at that point. Nobles weren't buying the crystals from the poachers. Religious folk weren't buying from the poachers. They weren't making any money off of it. They were losing their lives. They eventually gave up. Though after the quelling of said, the aforementioned, I guess, since we went on a bit of a tangent with our living crystals, but after the removal of the rebellion / riot / X, Y, and Z, there was a summons for the group that had solved one of the biggest problems of the region. And said group was commissioned of sorts. There was a certain priestess who they had been speaking with and had run into several times throughout their journeys, who knew that one of them had spoken with the gods, and even though most other people didn't know, had been the only person for some time to do so. In regards to a increase in necromancer activity. As a result, they were sent over to the Eastern Lands due to a increase in uncertain energy. It was believed to be necromantic energy, but turned out to not be exactly accurate. They found out that the energy was actually from a completely different cult type that had formed over there. Having seen the amount of power that had come from some of the creatures that had come out of the portal, several of the more inland species of cliff gliders had actually started worshipping and trying to find ways to create their own portal, and had attempted to gain a control of sorts to summon their own creatures from it to test their own metal, or to continue the divine perfection, as they would put it, into becoming the strongest beings on the planet, or to become a stepping stone for whatever the strongest beings would be. Because their culture is very non-self-centered. They know that they aren't exactly the top of the food chain. They know that whatever they could die just as easily as anyone else can. They understand that strength is the only thing that they can assuredly interact with, and the only thing that they can assuredly rely on. And that is why they don't hold grudges. If they are defeated, the only thing that they will get mad about is the insult that you let them live for being so weak. And they will go out of their way to find you again and attempt to either defeat you this time or not let you stop until you have finally completely taken them down. Interestingly, they, contrary to what said priestess believed the energy was in relation to, due to this, they don't like necromancers either. They hate undead because you died once already. You don't get a second chance. You already lost. You can't cheat your way in order to become stronger. You should have earned that when you had your chance the first time. They don't like when you try and do that kind of stuff. Either way, in the end, where they didn't succeed in stopping the ritual, they did very much mitigate how bad it could have got. It did, however, lead to the opening of the well, which is a massive portal that carved its way into the Eastern lands. And I suppose that bringing that into the post-well era is a good point for me to take a short break, get myself a refill on my drink, and hit the bathroom. I found my map. Alright. So yeah, we have now entered the post-well era. A sizable number of years before modern Cincope, but we are now in the outside of Cincope where the modern era is. Ignore the fact that there are 2 markers on here. These are important. These were important for the one-shot, but the only important thing on this map for the purposes of this is the Abandoned Fortress and the Well of Souls. Expedition Base 7 is just where everyone started in the one-shot. But after the opening of the Well of Souls, which isn't actually just like a pit that goes into water, things were in kind of turmoil for quite some time. The Well of Souls was quite possibly the largest portal, and is still the largest portal that was ever recorded. Its opening caused the collapse of another cliff leading to the Eastern Lands, making it significantly more accessible. And it also marked the realization, shortly afterward, that the Nephanese were a bit smarter, a bit more advanced than most anyone gave them credit for. At least one group of them was. They had managed to get a fortress almost dead center in the Eastern Lands. And it's where isn't a conventional fortress like above the ground and everything. It was built underground. They didn't have to worry about like all the wildlife because all they had to do was protect one small area in order to not have to worry about most of the stuff, because everything had adapted for above ground. There were minor things underground, but you didn't have to worry about carnivorous plants. You didn't have to worry about effectively dinosaurs. You didn't have to worry about genetic abominations that had been created from just the amount of freaking different things that they were trying to adapt to at the same time, leading to weird genetic offshoots that were trying way too much at once. Thanks, evolution. You had some burrowing creatures, but due to them, already having the advantage of being burrowing creatures, they didn't really adapt to worrying about hyper-violent creatures. They didn't need massive shells. They didn't need to be the most toxic thing ever. They weren't exactly friendly, due to them still needing to have fighting instinct, but they were much more manageable. And after they had dug out enough, they built a sort of shrine over top of the area to cover up the entrance. And with nothing of really note, nothing really bothered with it. Things would walk into the shrine grounds and would even walk into the shrine, but the entrance to the underground complex was sealed. And nothing really messed with them. They didn't really have much to worry about until, aside from whenever they had issues with like their experiments down there, until the Well of Souls opened up. And the amount of backlash and between earthquakes from it literally eating a section of land, and the amount of energy being expended being equivalent to multiple nuclear warheads, and like, not many exactly did too well in regards to that. It was several years afterward before anyone could be rescued. But there were eventually rescue expeditions that were sent due to technological advances that had been made. The only one remaining as of the modern era was what remained of the head researcher of it. And the result of the Well of Souls opening up led to one really dumb death, because everyone else that was on board the ship that the person that named the Well of Souls was thought that that was an awful freaking idea, and they didn't think that giving a natural phenomenon that terrifying of a name, especially with the kinds of things that they had seen as a result of it, was terribly good. So they kinda keelhauled him. He had already kinda sent out that that was what the thing was gonna be called, so that didn't solve anything. But there was a man murdered because he named something that people didn't like, apparently. By the time anyone came forward and said that most everyone else on the ship had died of natural causes anyway, because, I mean, it was multiple years later. But over time, after the return of the group of adventurers that had come to stop the well from opening, and technically failed. Where they technically failed, they did little known to anyone else, save things from being so much worse, aside from themselves. They could take solace in that they stopped things from being so much worse, but people over time, the Tinkerers grew in ability and people's reliance on them. People in time did find out that the gods hadn't exactly been doing much. That the gods weren't exactly caring much about the world that they had quote-unquote created. And people just stopped believing in them. Well, they didn't stop believing in them, but they stopped, like, worshipping them, and as a result, the gods' powers rapidly declined, because if you don't have believers, and you're an entity composed of basically belief energy, you are not going to be able to do much. The only gods that really remained are some of the gods that were basically the gods of all the reptilian races, all which, due to the stronger ones making the calls on that, were basically just the dragon gods. And as a result of, the other gods not taking up as much space and the increase of other dimensions kind of merging. Merging is not a proper term for it, but enough people from other dimensions had started showing up that their belief had started to, give their gods a little bit of a connection to the other realms. And to Cincope itself. They never got to enough strength to, do anything of major, but, they could speak to their followers if they so wished, or they could give them a little bit of a boost. The post-Well era is effectively marked by a decline in focusing on magic and religion, and an increase in scientific advancement and discovery. Which is also why the Eastern lands were able to actually, get some progress made on them, and why, by the modern era, expeditions were able to be made to things like the abandoned Niphanese Fortress, and the like. Because people actually didn't have to rely on, things that could be eaten, or creations of their own two hands. And they actually had weapons that could, put a hole that was bigger than a dime in you, and or fire fast enough that even if they were tiny holes, there was going to be enough of them that you're not going to be doing much. It made them able to actually even the playing field a bit. The Eastern lands are still a very deadly place, but they are much, much more manageable now. And some people have actually gotten the respect of the Cliff Gliders as a result. They don't take too kindly to the Tinkerers due to their increase in tendency to augment themselves one way or another. They define this as cheating. If your own body is not enough to survive in the land, then you don't deserve it. Man, they really hate me. There were also various other chemicals and the like that have been created since then. that have had unexpected consequences. Whether they be from the portals themselves or combined from multiple compounds that have led to various offshoots, mutations, individual races that have had some sort of trait that has caused them to convergently mutate and creating other races, and interesting notes like that. Also, I'm not changing the map because I don't have another map right now. Most of my stuff was to do with the writing in order to get to this. I didn't... But names did change. Mortis Marshes aren't Mortis Marshes anymore. Though due to advancements, the small little fishing village here did actually become a little bit more advanced due to less worries about bandits and more hands to help them rebuild following the Black Dragon incident. They were able to come together and actually stop being so far behind due to just being effectively known as a graveyard. The Godspike rapidly grew, to put it bluntly. Advancements in architecture and advancements in general meant that it grew. Both physically and culturally. It is no longer known as the Godspike. The Breaded Lands are the only god-related things that are still about the same name. Because, I mean, they're named after the fact that they have a lot of wheat to them. The plants didn't go away just because the gods stopped caring. Tree elves still exist. They've expanded into other things as well. Mortis Hill is just the Grand Desert now. And that's one of the places that I spend a lot of my time, because big creatures are kind of my business. Oh, look at that. Oh, look how it all ties and as to why it's important for this in particular. Yeah, I, Nasu, am from Cincope. Aha! I'm not in Cincope yet, though. We haven't made it far enough past the post-well era. We're still advancing. The city on this peninsula have expanded. The southern city was already rather big, but it also advanced because those were two hubs for tinkerers. My encoding is... Oh, that's why my encoding randomly will freaking... Because Discord's spaghetti code is randomly deciding to spike up. That's nice to know. Either way. Nifon has become pretty much a united nation now. And they've come to peace with the Minotaurs of the lower islands. Now that everyone's kinda able to... Nifon owns the Metal Isles. The Minotaurs get tools and whatnot as they request, because Nifon doesn't need like standard, like smaller degree tools. There's a hierarchy in Nifon based off of like various roles that each race is suited for, whether it be diplomacy, technology, war. The frozen shelves are still a barren wasteland, except for by people that for some reason decide that they want to be up there. The northern lands are a bit less sparse, but I mean, we're talking basically we're Alaska now instead of being Siberia. It's basically the difference. But that's where I'm from. Aha. I am a cold boy, which is the reason why I have well, most of these features, honestly. Several bits of this I am going to leave a bit on the... no, well, since we're still in the era of before modern Cincope, I'll not really going into any vagueness, but after all the islands were brought in, they also got the benefits of advancement. The worshippers of Obsidian actually are one of the few that kept most of their religion, because it wasn't really a religion, it was kind of a how do I put this? It was more of a social thing rather than a religious thing. The Star Island kind of still became a sort of refuge. After they were brought in, some of them did go out, but the Star Island, due to being an island of effectively misfits, they decided that they were going to allow people to come in if they felt like they were unwanted in the rest of society. So, the monster people of the Star Island, where they have expanded into the two neighboring islands, they are still kind of isolationist to a certain degree. Eventually, everyone from the Southern Isles kind of started intermingling once they had the ability to. But being as to pretty much every island was full of people from other dimensions and other worlds, they didn't exactly know how to feel about it. Most of them that had come to accept it did pretty alright. Some of them still kind of hoped to return home. Maurice, from the northern area, eventually did find all the fragments of her friend. his friend. And where it's unknown if they ever made it back home. They haven't exactly been seen for quite some time, so it's assumed that they did. The little shop in the forest still does exist, though. The proprietor of that does still exist. Refuses to actually elaborate, though, on what happened to good old Maurice. Once the western portion of the eastern lands opened, this beach here kinda actually did become a more... Okay, I am freaking... Oh, that's why, because I have level 20 open. That might be what's hurting it. But it did become a more established area. Both of the port towns were actually in about the same predicament. Through most of the Legends era, they didn't have anything going for them. Not many people wanted to stick around them unless they were born there. And they were kind of stuck with some form of strife or another that they weren't able to really expand or even really keep up. But in the post-Well era, they gained things. Each of them has their own tinkerer's shops now. Each of them has gained actual stable land for their docks and whatnot. Ugh, my head. I'm feeling a bit woozy. Too much talking. So most of the post-Well era has been effectively just advancement, 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 advancement. And it was very, very rapid, especially due to the amount of portal stuff that had been going on during it. They were far past the point of this is going to be an issue because we have to do everything by hand, luckily, by the time any major ones happen. But it was still a coin toss as to whether or not it was going to be a good thing or not whenever a portal opened. They were much more manageable with the advent of, like, more advanced firearms and advancements in protection. But let's turn the clock forward into modern era. Ooh. The important stuff. Stuff that's not just saying, yeah, things advanced because, you know, that's what happens in times. Obviously, as we mentioned before, there's fortresses dotted all around here, and I keep wanting to ping this stuff, but I can't do that in Image Viewer. The abandoned fortress was found. Sometimes time goes backward. Also, I noticed that you're in the call. I'm surprised that you haven't said anything. I mean, I could just... fair enough. Christ. Talking always gets me yawning. Group of people met at Expedition Base 7. And I'll just go through the one-shot real quick. Considering that puts us in the modern era, and as far as stuff that's important for a lot of the other people that are... or some of the other people that would be viewing. They went into the abandoned fortress and found out that our director was the only survivor by that point that hadn't evacuated and had severely augmented not only himself but several remaining they were unlucky cliff gliders, and potentially something else that they didn't quite understand what they were. But he had heavily augmented himself in ways that weren't expected for pre-well era tinkerers at all, which led everyone to believe that Nifon was a little bit further along than anyone had actually known. Aha. But due to the lack of anyone actually, I'm gonna spoil a bit for some of the stuff that's gonna be in like the first session, but it's mostly just world building stuff. Because one of the players is actually gonna be migrating their way across. The most identifiable thing on their way back across will be that avatar turtle that was mentioned prior was actually hunted and is currently in the process of being turned into food. Dragon turtle meat is quite effective when the turtle itself is the size of an island. A lot of the stuff from modern Cincope is actually, like, rather straightforward. It's a science fantasy kind of deal. Like, you've obviously got me, who's got freaking augmentations left, right, and center. Got the Tinkerers, which are also freaking, depending on their degree of and specialization, can be cybernetic addicts. Which is, to a certain degree, helpful for them, considering it makes them a bit more resilient when they decide to do insane things like punch a creature that is already known to be very volatile, has one person found out in the end of the one-shot. But due to their ability to effectively augment anything. They have a very wide range of things that they are good at. Some of them are just good at learning and teaching, so they become teachers or researchers. Some of them obviously want to test the limits of what the human body can do when it comes to when it's augmented, so they'll become mercenaries, adventurers, slayers, as they're called. Hey, look, there's another thing. There's me. I'm not a cyber addict, though. Trust me. Oh god, my spine. Oh, that actually felt nice. Ugh. A lot of slayers tend to go into the Grand Desert and try and finish off what freaking was started years ago and get rid of some of the undead problems so people can actually start trying to inhabit it again. Because it's still a relatively resource-rich area, and it has a lot of value to archaeologists due to having multiple dead civilizations hidden under the sands. It's a good source of money for those that feel like going into the scorching hot desert with very little help, for very little in the way of reprieve. Aside from when you finally do find one of said lost civilizations and are underground for days, weeks, months, depending on how bad the surface is compared to the underground for said one. That's what people like me are for, where we go in and we keep the eggheads alive while we kill off, I don't know, whether it be juvenile sandworms that may be around, undead that are still continuing to prowl around and are still very angry, or maybe a group of less than pleased squatters that are not too keen on us investigating their new home. I'm not paid to ask questions in that regard. We don't just specifically kick them out, but if they're gonna freaking attack us, then, well. I tend to stick towards the bigger side of things, though. Sandworms especially. Maybe one day I'll go over to the Eastern Lands and get some decent prizes. Airship advancements have made things considerably more effective as far as getting places in hours or days rather than months. It's also a reason why more inland fortresses are more feasible in the modern era, because you don't have to trudge your way all the way through a winding cavern or through days and weeks of forest. You just fly over top, lower the thing down, and then fly out. As long as you got some good people on the guns to freaking deal with the flying things, you're fine. So this is the approximate point where the actual stream ended, where all of my discussion was done. So that's going to be actually it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions actually pertaining to my world or anything that you would like explained further on, please leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to actually do more lore days like this, where I explain the world that I've been creating for about approximately 3 years now, on and off, and more steadily in the past 2 years, and also, obviously, as a world for me. This is being obviously recorded post everything else, which is why there is no video for it. It is merely a still image. But again, thank you all so much for watching. Like if you liked, leave a comment if you have anything that you'd like to further know, and I'll see you all in the next one. Subscribe to join the eggplant patch. I still haven't quite decided a name for that. It's probably going to be that because I'm sticking with it, it seems. And have a nice day. Bye!